Hello there, John Coutrillo here, the life coach of your listener. Thank you for joining me for this episode. Today I'll be discussing the topic of attitudes towards work and work ethics in today's culture. Now, I fully acknowledge that this is not a simple issue. There are numerous reasons that different people may perform differently in their jobs and why people may have specific attitudes towards work. So I'm certainly not attempting to prescribe some attitude that is meant to be an antidote to all problems regarding work culture, but rather I'd like to discuss some of the concerns that I've observed in order to facilitate this discussion and hopefully facilitate positive change. Now, if you haven't yet, I would highly recommend that you watch my video on the slippery slope phenomenon. I have linked it in the description to this video. It will greatly help in understanding some of the concepts that I'll be discussing today. Now, across cultures and across time, attitudes towards work have varied. It's sometimes said that at one time, even in the West, the attitude towards work was that people should live to work. That is to say, a person's job is their end goal. Whereas now, the attitude has shifted to working to live. That is to say, a person's job supports them in order to engage the other life goals that they have that are more meaningful to them personally. Now, work in some form is actually a natural phenomenon. In our evolutionary history, we may have exchanged labour for goods and vice versa, and cooperated in order to survive. And these types of activities do have an adaptive purpose. Money, currency, and the associated economics, I would argue, are not a natural phenomenon. These phenomena were invented by us as agents by which we could exchange essential goods and services. Unfortunately, what that's also done in history has given rise to engaging in business for the wrong reasons, for selfish and greedy reasons. And of course, throughout history, unfortunately, incredibly exploitative and harmful activities have been undertaken under the guise of business. Whenever business is involved, there is always going to be some risk that somebody is going to misuse it for their own selfish reasons. And arguably, this is unnatural. Arguably, it is a more natural and logical solution for us to directly exchange what we need for our basic survival with other needs. For example, exchanging essential goods for our survival, materials for building shelter and for making clothing, directly with labour that is required in our survival, exchanging food, etc. These are arguably more logical, but with the invention of business in our evolutionary history, there was extra complexity added to that. That said, because of this negative association between business and greed or exploitation, what seems to have happened is many people have taken an entirely opposing attitude towards work and decided that they completely reject the notion in and of itself. And that reportedly can make one feel like somewhat of an outcast in a society in which work is accepted as a given. Now, I'm certainly not excusing bad deeds that are done under the guise of business, but I would argue that it's not adaptive to completely reject the notion of work based on what people sometimes do in the course of their work. Rather, I would argue that a more adaptive solution is to actually use business and work as an opportunity to act for the greater good. And I'm going to discuss that later. But one of the major concerns that I've found, I've observed it myself, colleagues in the workplace have observed it and reported those concerns to me, and of course my clients with whom I've worked have also reported this concern, is that we seem to be allowing our standards of work ethic to drop considerably. And there are a variety of different signs that I've observed of this being the case. It has happened persistently, and again, it's been reported from multiple sources that this seems to be happening, and it has a negative impact on the entire society in which it happens. Perhaps one of the major overarching problems has been the attitude with which people approach work. I've often seen people not necessarily appreciate what it means to be employed. When one considers that having a well-paying job and being financially well places one in something of a minority when we consider the entire world and consider how many people are impoverished, a lot of people don't consider that. A lot of people don't see that being financially well in that sense is something which should be appreciated and ideally appreciated every day. But a lot of people take it for granted, and that particular attitude seems to be manifesting itself in the way they approach their work. They don't necessarily chase excellence. They don't necessarily want to be the best work that they possibly can. They don't necessarily want to honour what they're being paid. They also don't seem to understand the important relationship between money, their work, and their client's sacrifice. In fact, I've never heard it vocalized that when you are hired, the person hiring you is essentially making a sacrifice. Your client is essentially sacrificing money which they've undoubtedly had to work incredibly hard to earn, especially in this day and age. They're sacrificing that money and in return expect a good or a service from you. Although even when selling goods, there is always some service attached to it. And it's crucial that we start to recognize that in minute detail, because as trivial as it may seem, it really places into perspective the importance of chasing excellence in your job. Because when you consider just how much effort it takes to earn a living these days, and especially how easy it is to lose money, it should lead you to appreciate that when someone is willing to give up the results of their labor, that money to you, that you honor it by showing them that you take it seriously and that you want to do what is in their best interest. And part of doing that is by devoting yourself fully to your job. So understanding that symbiosis is crucial. What's also incredibly concerning, which can quite possibly be connected to the notion of business being used for exploitative purposes, is when especially larger businesses start to adopt rhetorical mantras and buzz phrases, sayings that don't hold meaning in and of themselves unless somebody actually acts on them in earnest, but that people seem to believe have meaning in and of themselves. And we've no doubt all witnessed this when employees of a large company, or even sometimes a small company, are constantly repeating customer service mantras, company mottos, mission statements, concepts that have been codified into specific phrases and similar. If one repeats them often enough, eventually they start to believe that just by using the right language and parroting the right buzz phrases, that in and of themselves they're enacting the meaning. And what that does is completely take your attention away from the fact that the mantras in themselves hold no meaning beyond what you actually do. You have to live them, and you have to live them in earnest, which means not just following a rigid set of guidelines and expecting that that will always yield a favourable result to the person who's sacrificing that money to have you service them. It means putting in the effort to use your judgment, carefully consider each situation, being willing to put in the effort to understand and problem solve as best as possible. And really, this type of rhetorical language doesn't facilitate that. It essentially, I would even dare say, is designed to blind people. It's designed to blind people to the fact that life is incredibly nuanced and requires effort to engage in. And so rather than encouraging people to put the effort into tackling problems one at a time and chasing excellence in the way that they approach that, it encourages people to essentially just take for granted that they are hired to follow a specific set of guidelines. And by doing that, it's much easier to control employees. But what it also does is lead to a lot of unsatisfied customers who are tired of constantly having mantras parroted to them. They want people to listen to them, and it's been undoubtedly the case that I've seen that. Another possible manifestation of this issue is in informality, which is in the way people communicate. I've often seen in social services, being the industry to which I've been exposed in recent years, that there appears to be less of a divide between one's personal life and one's professional life. And I've seen some social workers become uncomfortably close with their clients in terms of their relationships, not necessarily in a way that breaches ethics, not necessarily having relationships outside of work, but rather treating their clients too much like friends. And this is a very much a missed nuance. Being professional and friendly to someone doesn't mean having to treat them like a friend. Treating somebody with respect means being sensitive to their needs and doing what is in their best interests, and being able to communicate in ways that demonstrate to them that you are approaching their best interests. It doesn't mean treating them like a friend, because if you treat them like a friend, what's happening is you're reinforcing a particular idea in your mind that the situation is a social one rather than a professional one, and it changes your cognitive state to one which is more akin to being social, which essentially could potentially, but based on neurological evidence and cognitive evidence, could potentially also be a situation that attunes your mind more to social activity rather than work activity. Essentially, you're reinforcing social habits to yourself in a situation in which they shouldn't be reinforced. Cognitive evidence demonstrates that what we do influences how we think and feel reciprocally with how we think and feel influences what we do. And so if we don't place boundaries for our own purposes and attune our minds to a professional conduct, then we're possibly going to be less effective in conducting our work for that particular client. At the same time, it's not doing the client any favors because it's not reinforcing professional boundaries. To them, it can even lead our clients, no matter how friendly we think we're being, if we're being too social, it can actually lead our clients to think less of our quality of work, because having a strong professional sense of conduct is incredibly reassuring to our clients. It demonstrates to them that our mind is attuned to doing what they've paid us to do. If we're being too social, we are less likely to provide that impression to them. So we have to reinforce professional boundaries, not just for our relationship with the client to ensure that the client sees that we're doing what's in their best interest, but at the same time, not allowing our minds to be attuned to anything other than what we are meant to be doing in that moment. It also manifests in the language that people tend to use. People have, in recent years, I found, have been using increasingly informal language and even using emoticons and emojis and similar in business communications. And I don't believe this is appropriate. As I said, even at a subconscious level, a person does form an impression about your competence as a worker. And if they're paying you, yes, they will want to receive friendly service. Yes, they will want to receive empathy and care. But you can be empathic and caring without being unprofessional. And clients receive a much better impression, even at a subconscious level, if you are formal, but at the same time demonstrate in a variety of other ways that you are acting in their best interest and enacting your role with dedication and with honor for what that person has sacrificed for you, than if you simply present informally and overly sociably. What I've also observed, quite concerningly, is an increasingly relaxed approach, overly relaxed approach in work culture. I've seen increasingly in the last few years that people are taking incredibly long time, sometimes weeks, to respond to simple communications, to return calls. People often try to multitask in the workplace, which, if you haven't yet, I suggest you research the psychology literature on multitasking. The spoiler alert is it's cognitively impossible to do. I would highly suggest you look at the evidence if you don't believe me, but those are the findings. People don't place emphasis on logical order. They don't place emphasis on being organized. They don't place emphasis on being expedient in their approaches to tasks. Approaches are just too laissez-faire, and that's not healthy. Again, people are sacrificing their hard-earned money for you. They expect outcomes, and if you were a client, you would expect outcomes as well. So be the type of worker that you would want if you were the one paying the money to have that job done. Now, as I said before, I fully recognize that business has been a guise under which people have enacted incredibly exploitative tactics. So I'm not excusing that, and I'm not saying that people shouldn't have work-life balance. In fact, I'm a brutal advocate for work-life balance. I myself may have had trouble with work-life balance in the past, and I saw the consequences of it. So I myself had to be humbled and had to recognize the need for my own self-care. So I fully understand that. But it doesn't mean that you can't chase excellence as well in your role and honor that being employed and being financially well, whatever the extent to it may be, is something which you should honor. It's something that you should be appreciative for every day. And you should really use business as an opportunity to act for the greater good. Whatever the job is that you do, there's always a way that your job can be done for the greater good. Obviously, the restrictions of your employer are always going to be at play. Obviously, you have to work within rules. But take personal pride and see personal meaning in your work. I know a lot of people hate their jobs. I fully acknowledge that. I fully acknowledge that some people can't help their situation. But use your job as an opportunity to see how good you can be. How good can you be at your job? Until you've really put that effort into it, you don't know how far you can go. And who knows, if you hate your job, even placing the effort into it and seeing just how well you can perform might even inspire you to move towards a job that you actually enjoy, and that might even be a vocation instead of just a job for you. You just don't know. Chasing excellence in life is a journey. It's not an end goal. Simply working hard for the sake of allowing somebody else to exploit you isn't what I'm advocating. What I'm advocating is that when you fully apply yourself to something, to an endeavor, you're inevitably going to learn something. You're inevitably going to accomplish something. And getting into the habit of chasing excellence is great for the mind. It could leak into your personal life. It could allow you to enjoy a hobby more. It could allow you to chase a personal interest more effectively that you've always wanted to. Chasing excellence is a learning experience, and it can start in your job. And when somebody is sacrificing something so that you can work, honor it, acknowledge it, and work towards excellence so that the client can receive the service that you would want to receive if you were the one sacrificing the money. Now, I understand that this is a controversial topic, so again, I'm not looking to minimize that people get exploited in business. What I am saying is, if you're one of the lucky people who gets to work a satisfactory job and that you have the chance to be a force for good, don't waste that chance. Use it. Because there is an immense sense of satisfaction, and society and the people for whom you're working will thank you immensely. Especially if you're a social worker, as I was, in which case my clients were incredibly vulnerable and often didn't have any other assistance in the way that I was providing. The sense of being able to provide the greater good for someone really made a difference, and I'll forever be grateful for it. So thank you for joining me for this episode. As always, I would love to hear about your experiences and your opinions. Please feel free to write to me or comment below. And if you are experiencing concerns about your work, please do not take this as advice. Seek professional help. Until next time, take care.